Okay, we're on 59b Mishnah. The Mishnah is 5 lines in the bottom of the page. Okay, so this Gemara is continuing the discussion. We had two people, right? One of them was I shouldn't say we started off the parak with two fellows. One who was a what was he going to say? One was that each one was a suffix. There was a suffix who became tummy. So when we try to figure out some sort of compromise to guarantee both of them to become tahor in the proper way. That was a discussion yesterday, and now we move on to a slightly different variation. We saw some of this Gemara previously. I think you saw it in the beginning of the week. And now we'll go through it at length. And it's not a difficult Gemara, but there's a lot of calculations to be made. So let's try it. Okay, so we have the first scenarios. So we're going to be talking here about a bunch of sfekas, doubt. So we don't know. The first scenario is Nazir shayatame b'safek. We have a Nazir. We don't know if he became tummy. Safek if he became tummy. Umuchlik b'safek. And maybe he's also a mitzayra. So let's review this. How exactly does a Nazir tummy become tahor? So let's just review this. A tummy becomes restarts as Naziris by counting 7 days. In those 7 days, he does a process called hazah. The ashes of the parah aduma, the red heifer, are sprinkled on him, and then at the conclusion of that 7 day period, he goes to the mikvah, and then he cuts his hair, and then he restarts his Naziris. That's how Nazir Tameh restarts. 7 days with hazah, mikvah, korban. I'm sorry, mikvah, korban, and tagalachas, cutting his hair. We also have the concept of mitzvah. How does a mitzvah end the period of mitzvah? So the first thing, obviously, is he has to no longer be a mitzvah. What does that mean? It means that technically speaking, the nega, the leprous blemish that he had, shrunk. It got smaller. Now, okay, obviously, so now he's no longer mitzvah. Now he's no longer mitzvah. He has to become pure again, become tahor. How does that happen? First thing he does is he shaves his head and he brings two mitzvah birds. And then a week later, he shaves his head again and brings another bird. Another bird is chados. And then he's permitted to basically enter into the community. He's permitted to enter into Jerusalem. He cannot enter the temple, though. If he wants to enter the temple, there's another process, another set of korbanos that are brought at a later point, and then he's able to go into the Beis HaMikdash. But with the exception of going into the Beis HaMikdash, he's allowed to eat kachim, which means if he's in Jerusalem and he wants to partake in a korban Pesach, he may absolutely partake in a korban Pesach. Even though korban Pesach is obviously a sacrifice, it's eaten in Jerusalem, and even though he's not completely pure, he's still allowed to eat it. Okay, so now we have a story of a Nazir shayatame b'safek umuchlik b'safek. He might be a mitzayra. So what does he do? So now the problem here is, remember, a mitzayra needs to shave his head twice, right? Once at when the blemish shrinks, once 7 days later. A Nazir tameh, 7 days, 8th day mikvah, tagalachas, korban. Mikvah, korban, tagalachas. So you go to the mikvah, bring your korban and shave your head, and then you restart your Naziris.
Sorry, did we not have to sprinkle?
Mitzvah requires a different. No, the sprinkling is for Nazir Tameh, Hazah.
Okay.
For a mitzvah, it's a different procedure. It's called the Shnei Tziparim, 2 birds. So 1 bird is slaughtered, 1 bird is released. Okay. Again, Nazir Tameh, one tagalachas. 7 days. So it's 7 days with Hazah, mikvah, korban, tagalachas. Mitzvah, it's shaving his head, shnei tziparim, 2 birds, 7 day waiting period, and then 7 day waiting period, and then he has to do it. Then he has to shave his head again, plus bring korban chatas, a bird, chatas saif. Okay, so now a guy's a tameh. He's tameh with a suffix. He's a mitzvah suffix. So now here's the problem. You can't just shave your head because maybe you're actually a Nazir. And if you're a Nazir, you're not allowed to shave your heads. Okay, so what do? You can eat kachim after 60 days. What does that mean? First 30 days, maybe he's a mitzvah. We'll see the specifics in a moment. We'll break it down. We'll break it down. The Gemara will break it down for us. We'll explain how it's 60 days. You can drink wine and become tummy, meaning the Naziris concludes after 120 days. Basically, you need four times you need to count 30 days. And 3 tagalachas in the middle. 2 of those tagalachas of the shavings would be for mitzvah, 1 for tummy, and we'll get to the details in the Gemara. If somebody is a Nazir and he's also a mitzvah, he's a full-fledged mitzvah, then he could shave his head. There's nothing wrong with that. We saw that the mitzvah shaving his head pushes away the prohibition of Nazir and the mitzvah. We saw that at length on earlier this week, Tuesday. But now that he's a Suffolk Mitzvah, in other words, you don't know if he's a Mitzvah. So because he's a Suffolk Mitzvah, therefore his shaving does not push away the laws of Nazir. Okay, I think we'll break it down. We'll get to specifically in a moment, the specifics in a moment. Tana, we learned this all makes sense if the Naziris was very short, meaning there was a standard 30-day Naziris. Let's say it was a 1-year Naziris. So then what happens? So it's going to be a 4-year cycle, right? The first 2 make you no longer a Suffolk Mitzvah. And he drinks wine and can become tummy, meaning he ends his Naziris after 4 years. The Tani alarm we learned. So this is a little bit of the Gemara, Gemara. You have a lot of calculations here to try to hold with. So let's go. It's short Gemara, but it's a lot in it. And the Gemara will break it down each piece on its own afterwards. So what happens? He has to shave his head 4 times. We're 4 lines. Actually, now the first word of the 5th line. 68, 5th line.
All right.
Tagalachas Rishona, the first shaving of his head. When does that come? That's 30 days in. So again, we have a Nazir. He's Vadai Nazir. Certainly a Nazir. He might be a Mitzvah, he might be Tomei. So first 30 days in, Tagalachas Rishona, the first shaving, maybe Tziparim, he brings the 2 birds that a Mitzvah brings. The Chatasaif and a sacrifice of a Chatasaif. This Chatasaif is brought because maybe he actually isn't a Mitzvah, but he's Tameh instead. So if he's Tameh, he needs to bring a Chatas to atone for the fact that he was a Nazir who became Tameh. The Chatasaif, the Oilas Behema, and also an animal, an Oilah. Why does he need to bring an Oilah? Because maybe he wasn't Tameh, and maybe he wasn't a Mitzvah. So he just finishes Naziris. So he brings the carbon oil and he says, we'll see what he says. Shnia, the second time, maybe chatas oif v'oilas behema. He brings a chatas oif and an oil. Why does he bring a chatas oif? Because maybe he was a mitzvah. If he's a mitzvah, then remember mitzvah ends in a two-step cycle. First, you shave your heads, then you bring the 2 birds. 1 which is slaughtered, 1 is set free. You count 7 days. You shave your head again and bring a carbon chatas, a chatas saif. We'll talk about chatas saif in a moment also. You bring a chatas. Okay. So now this guy, if he was a mitzvah, so he finished his mitzvah. The 8 days had to be 30 days because maybe he wasn't a mitzvah, but he was tamei, and therefore if he was a mitzvah and he was tamei, now is actually his naziros because he atoned for his naziros in the first 30 days. Now he's actually a Nazir, so you can't shave your head 38 days later, 7 days after the 30 days, because maybe you're a Nazir. So you have to wait the full 30 days. And now if you were a Mitzvah, you end your Mitzvah. If you weren't a Mitzvah, but you were Tamei, now is actually the conclusion of your Naziris. Right? The first 30 days was when you ended your you ended the Tumah cycle. Then you became Tahar. And now the next 30 days is your period of Naziris. Okay. Shlishis, the third time, right? This is day number 90. Day number 90, he's certainly not a Mitzvah. What happened? Maybe he was both a Mitzvah and he was Tamei. If he's a Mitzvah and he was Tamei, so the first 90 days got rid of his Mitzvah, but he's still Tamei. So another 30 days to get rid of his Tumah, end the Tumah at 90 days, right? And now the remaining, the last 30 days is maybe he was a Nazir and a Mitzvah. Now he ended his Naziris, he ended his Mitzvah, he ended his Tumah. And now from day 90 to 120, he's actually a Nazir. And then Revius,
cleared all of those.
you see, he cleared everything else. And now the 90 to 120, he's actually a Nazir. And therefore, the end of 120, what happens? Revius may be carbon tahara, he brings the full carbon tahara. What is that? An Ayla, a Shlamim, and an Asham. Okay, so now the Gemara will break it down. Amrit, let's go through what we learned. Tagalachas Rishaina, the first attempt, the first shaving, 30 days later. Maybe, so what do you bring? Maybe he was tahar. One second, hold on. You bring two birds, right? Two birds as a mitzvah. And the Gemara says, why do you bring two birds? Either way, you're okay. If he was a mitzvah, let's say he was just a mitzvah, but he wasn't tummy. So you need to bring two birds because he's a mitzvah. See, the two birds, he's obligated to bring because he's a mitzvah. The chatas that he brings, maybe it's because he's tummy, maybe it's because he isn't tummy. It's a suffix. But that's not a problem because azl l'kfura, because he goes to burial. Meaning that typically we have a rule, we don't want to bring chulin in the azara. An animal that's not sanctified in the azara. Like we said many times in Nazir, you cannot bring the korban chatas unless you are obligated to bring one. Well, hold on a second. Over here, what do? Maybe he's obligated, maybe he's not. See, the korban chatas is actually a suffix. However, the korban chatas is not such a problem. Why? Because if the chatas is slaughtered and we don't know what we could do with it, so we just bury it. So we don't bring it on the altar, and that's not a problem of bringing chulin in the azara. Okay. So now so maybe he's not tummy. Okay, so the chatas will be buried. What happens actually if he wasn't tummy and he wasn't a mitzvah? So now he just ended his naziris, and he brings a korban oila, like anyone who ends their naziris. Okay, what happens if he was tummy though? The korban oila is considered a gift. The oila having a dava. The oila is considered a gift. It's not considered an obligation. Okay. So the Gemara asks. So now, if he's a mitzvah, he has to shave his head again 7 days later. Why can't he do that? The Gemara says, that's not possible. Why? Maybe he wasn't a mitzvah. Maybe he's just a nazir. He wasn't a mitzvah at all. And the Torah says, that a nazir is not allowed to shave his hair. So therefore, you have to wait 30 days. Okay. The ilav mitzvah hava v'hu tamei. Let's say he wasn't a mitzvah and he was tamei. So chadas oif chevasai. Chadas oif is an obligation. It's the tzipor and the two birds avroi kamis abdin. They're done out. They're not even done in the temple. So there's no problem at all of chulin bazara, a non-sanctified animal inside the temple. 1 second. And the oila is a gift. Okay. The ilav mitzarehu, v'lav tamehu. Let's say he's not a mitzvah and he isn't tamei. Then tziporin, the birds we're not concerned about. Avroi comes out because they're done outside the temple. Chatas oif, the chatas l'kvura. That's going to be buried. That also takes away the problem of chulin bazar. Oilas behema, the carbon oila havachevase. That's his obligation because he ends his naziris at that point, 30 days later. And he has to bring a carbon oil. The Gemara asks, you also need to bring a carbon asham. The Gemara says, no, Reb Shimon, so the Gemara says this could be going according to the opinion of Reb Shimon. Shimon is of the opinion that a shlomim can be brought as, that an osham can be brought as a shlomim. A carbon osham could also be brought as a conditional shlomim.
Okay. So
this way he could say, if I ended my naziris, this animal is going to be the obligatory osham. And if I did not end my naziris, this is a gift of a shlomim. And obviously, an osham is limited to being inside the temple. Can't take the carbon outside. A shlom is not like that. A shlom you can eat anywhere in Jerusalem. And obviously, in such a scenario, you can't bring it out. Can't bring it outside the temple because maybe it's an osham. But the Gemara is presuming that isn't the difficulty. So you'll have to be machmir. You'll have to be stringent.
So part of this, you have to be in Jerusalem.
All of it. And the exception of the sacrifices that end a person's muchlat status as a mitzvah, they have to be done in Jerusalem. Okay. Now, so the Gemara says, Tagalachas Shniya, day number 60. He goes for a second shaving, right? Ushlishis and the third one, which is day number 90. So Tziporin loitzarach, he doesn't need to bring two birds because if he was a mitzvah, he already brought the two birds. Don't need to bring two birds twice. Ta'ovid. Ma'ik lamemar. Ma'ik, what is there? Now, if he was a mitzvah, then day number 60 is the completion of his purity process, right? It's that 8-day process that took 30 days because maybe he was a nazir. So if he was actually a mitzvah, day number 30 is the end of his mitzvah. Day number 60 is the end of that 8-day process. Okay, so he has to bring a carbon chatos that he typically brings at the end of the 8-day process. That makes sense. Now, day number 90, what's the only possibility of day number 90? Maybe he was a mitzvah and he was tamei. Maybe he was a mitzvah and he was tahar. If he was a mitzvah and he was tahar, his naziris actually ends day 90, right? 60 days to get rid of the mitzvah, 30 days for naziris, right? If he was a mitzvah and he was tamei, it's another 30 days to get rid of tumah. So at the end of tumah, what do you need to do? You need to bring a bird as a chatos. Chadal suffix sifrei. One of them is for maybe the suffix sifrei. So now mitzvah who is becoming pure has a two-step process. He starts off as a muchlat, meaning he's outside the camp. He has to live alone. Mm-hmm. A muchlat status is until the nega gets smaller. Once the nega gets smaller, so then he brings the two birds. He's no longer a muchlat. Now we call him a sifrei. He's yomei sifrei. He's counting the 8 days. So the carbon at 60 days is maybe he's yomei sifrei. Maybe he's ending that 8-day process. The chadal is safik tumasei, and one of them and the 90-day chatos is because maybe he's tamei. Okay, it's important to recognize, by the way, these chatos, what we call oil of yared. Oil of yared means that if you're wealthy, you bring an animal. If you're poor, you bring a bird. You can't bring an animal in this case. Why not? Because you bring chun lazara. Maybe you're not tamei, you weren't a mitzvah, and this chatos is superfluous.
Oh.
So it's actually not even sanctified, and you're bringing a non-sanctified animal. And the only solution to do this is with a bird. With a bird, you don't have this prohibition because a bird could be buried. Okay, what's the problem with a bird? You have to be a pauper. So what do? We make you into a pauper. How do you make yourself into a pauper? It's very simple.
It's like putting a democratic administration.
How do you make yourself into a pauper? You gift all your assets. So what you need to, in order to end the naziris, you have to bring your pauper's animal. What do? You write all your assets to gift to somebody else.
Wow.
And if you do that, the naziris ends.
Like a spiritual protection, right?
Well, the other guy could really collect.
Yeah. Okay. Now let's finish this up. Okay. Tagalachas Revius, the fourth time. This is day number 120. Maybe carbon tahara. He brings a carbon he brings the regular oila shlom and osham, because regardless, he's certainly finished his naziris at this point, and therefore everything is fine. Umasne, and he makes a condition. Okay, what's the condition? If I wasn't both tamei and a mitzvah, then I already brought the oila earlier, and the osham and the shlom are valid. right? Actually, we're going according to the opinion of Reb Shimon. So the shlomim, the oil and the shlomim are a gift, and the asham should be considered a shlomim. And if I was both a mitzvah and I was a nazir, I was both I'm sorry, I was both a mitzvah and I was tamei. So now my nazir is actually ending right now, and therefore the animals should be appropriate according to what it typically takes to end a naziris.
They have a very non-complicated chart.
That's a good point. If anyone has the art scroll, you can see they have it all charted out for you.
Oh, my God.
Okay, but of course we're not done yet.
Of
Okay.
course.
Now, what happens now? We go. So again, we have two variables here, right? The variables are mitzvah and tamei. So in the first scenario, he was a suffix mitzvah and a suffix tamei.
Well, Nazir is also.
A nazir is a vadai, so he's certainly a nazir. We know he was a nazir.
We know he's not.
We just don't know if he was tamei or if he became tamei or if he was a mitzvah.
So that's fixed.
Okay, now we have two more variations of this. Actually, three more variations. And variation one is we know he was. One second. Another line. Okay, let's see. Three more variations as follows. We know he was tamei, but we don't know if he was a mitzvah. We know he was a mitzvah, but we don't know if he's tamei. And we know he was a mitzvah, and we know he's tamei. And we'll go through all that. So let's first finish up the last scenario with 120 days. So he makes a condition. The vade nazir, if after 120 days, if he was the vade nazir who oila rishayna chayva. One second. This is since. Vade nazir who oila rishayna chayva v'zunadova. If he was neither tamei nor tahar nor mitzvah, so then the first set of karbanis ended his naziris, and these are all gifts. If he was both tamei and a mitzvah, so the first sets of sacrifices were gifts, and this is an obligation. And this is the rest of his karbanis. Okay, so now we get to the next scenario. Tamei suffik umuchlat vadai. We don't know if he became tamei, but we know he's a mitzvah. Okay, so if we know he's a mitzvah, remember, mitzvah pushes away naziris, right?
Right.
So it takes 8 days for him to eat kachim, like a standard mitzvah. A standard mitzvah takes 8 days to become pure. It's shave your head immediately with two birds, and then 8 days later, bring a chat saif and shave your head again. So that's fine. So now you need to wait another 67 days, additional 60 days because in other words, you have to get rid of your tumah, but we don't know if you're tamei. So we wait 30 days and then we say, bring the sacrifices. If you're tamei, it atones for your tumah and the rest of it's a gift. If you're tahar, you were never tamei, the other the tumah sacrifice is buried because it's chatas, and the rest of the karbanos are validated. But if you're actually tamei, so now that you became tar, another 30 days, total of 60 days plus 8. Right, so it's after 67 days, the 68th day. Okay, next scenario. Muchlat safek v'tamei vadai. We know he's tamei, but we don't know if he's a mitzvah. Okay, so remember, you need to shave your head twice as a mitzvah. So what do? One second. Hold on here. Okay. You can eat kachim after 37 days. Why is this? So because he's tamei, he shaves his head 7 days later, and that satisfies the requirement.
This is tamei.
In other words, he's certainly tamei,
Right.
but we don't know if he's a mitzvah.
Okay.
A tamei waits 7 days. He does hazah. He sprinkles the ashes to red heifer, and then he shaves his head. 1 second. Just make sure I have this. This seems to contradict. Okay, as follows. Because he's tamei, so he shaves his head on day number 7. Now that satisfies the first requirement of mitzvah as well. So if he was a muchla, if he was actually mitzvah, so then he's shaved himself once. Then he has to, technically speaking, he has to wait 8 days, but he can't wait just 8 days because we know he's tamei and we know he's a nazir. So right now, on the possibility that he isn't a mitzvah, he's a nazir. Can't shave your head if you're a nazir. So you have to wait the full 30 days, then shave your head again. So it's day number 38. You shave your head a second time, and then another 30 days, because remember, a nazir cannot count time as a mitzvah. So if he was both, we know he was tamei. If it also turns out he was a mitzvah, then it's 38 days to end. It was 38 days to end the mitzvah, and now it's another 30 days as a nazir. So it's 68 days until he can until he can drink wine, until he ends his naziris. To eat kachim, to end his mitzvah, is 38 days. And then an additional 30 days till he ends his naziris.
8-day periods.
So it's
places. One when you're tamei and
right.
when you're mitzvah.
Right.
So
Okay.
they both have a similar, that makes sense.
So muchlat safek v'tamei vadai. We don't know if he is a mitzvah. V'tamei vadai, but we know he certainly became tamei. Eichel bekachim la'achar shleishim v'shiva yamim. He eats kachim after 37 days. V'sheis yayin mitam l'meisim la'achar. 1 second. Hold on a second. No, I made a mistake here. Hold on. I'm sorry. No. Okay. Give me a moment here. Okay, as follows. The Gemara here is saying that when he cuts his hair for tumah, it does not satisfy the requirement of mitzvah. We'll soon explain that in a moment. So that's what I thought. I missed a line here. Okay, my mistake. You can't count them together. So because he's tamei, 7 days for hazah, you become tar. And now you count 30 days. Okay. If you were not a mitzvah, you ended your naziris at 30 days later. Day number 38, you atoned for your tumah, you finish your naziris. If you were a mitzvah, you haven't yet shaved. Day number 38 is the first day to shave. Now, now the next day to shave is 7 days later. Day number 30 day number 35. Day number 35 is the second day to shave. Why is that? Because what's the possibility? If you weren't a mitzvah, then you ended your naziris. You're allowed to shave. If you were mitzvah, so then your mitzvah pushes away naziris, and therefore 8 days later you shave again. So it's day number 20. So it's day number 38, day number 45. Count another 30 days because maybe you were both tamei and a mitzvah. And day number 45, you ended your mitzvah status. So count 30 days for naziris, you're up to day 75. After day number 74, meaning on day number 75, you are no longer a nazir. Okay, now we get to the easiest one of all. What happens if we know the guy was tamei and we also know that he was a mitzvah? We know he's both. Tamei vadei umuchlat vadei. He's tamei and he's a mitzvah. So eichel bekachim la'achar shmoina yom. He eats kachim after 8 days. In other words, the first thing you do is get rid of your mitzvah status. That's the first thing. How do you do that? Shave your head on day number 1, bring the 2 birds. Day number 8, shave your head again, bring a korban chatas. At that point, you're able to eat kachim. 1 second. Okay, just don't like this terminology here because it is tamei. Hold on. I'll check this out. Check this afterwards. It does seem to me a little bit odd because the guy's still tamei after 8 days. So it's technically he can eat kachim, but he can't actually eat kachim. He's tamei. He still hasn't got rid of his tumah. Then after 8 days, it's another 7-day process, right? Where he gets hazah, the ashes of the red heifer, goes to the mikvah, brings his karbanes to atone for the fact that he was a nazir who became tummy. Now we're at day number 15. And then 30 days of Nazir is day number 45, it's over.
So he can't do it at the same time.
Oh, exactly. And we'll explain why not in a moment. He ends his Naziris after day number 44, which is day number 45. Okay, now we have the question. The question Jules just raised. The students asked Reb Shimon bar Yochai, Nazir Tohar u'mitzera. This scenario we just said, the guy is Tameh and he's a Mitzera. Why doesn't one of his shavings count for both Tumah and Mitzera? Why does he need to shave 3 times before he can restart his Naziris? Why can't one time count for both? And it should count for both units. Amar Lahen, he says as follows: He doesn't count. You need to do 3 times, not twice. You can't double dip on one of the shavings. Amar Lai, so they said to him, Lama, why? Amar Lahen, he said, Ilu zel gadol v'zel gadol. V'zel haver v'zel haver yafat ma'imram. Achshav nazir lahaver mitzera legadol. Okay, this is an interesting point. The nazir shaves to get rid of his hair, whereas a mitzera shaves to grow his hair. In other words, the first shaving of a mitzera is to grow his hair to shave it a second time.
Right.
They can't count because they are being shaved for 2 different reasons. 1 second.
It's a close shave.
What?
It's a close shave.
It must have been the barber's union.
Okay, so they said to him, okay, so they said, okay, the first shaving of doesn't count. In other words, the first shaving of mitzvah is actually to grow your hair for the next 7 days, for that 8-day period. Whereas the first shaving of a nazir tameh is to remove his hair. Okay, fine, that doesn't make sense. But what about the second shaving, limei sifrei? After the 8-day period, he shaves to remove his hair. So why doesn't that satisfy the requirement of a nazir tameh? So Amar Lahem, he says to them, Ilu zelef nezir gastamim v'zel if they both occurred before Zrikastam, before the blood of the sacrifice was sprinkled, you'd be right. Ela mitzera, but in reality, mitzera is lefnei Zrikastamim. The mitzera on the last day of his 8-day period, he shaves his head before he brings his karbanos. It's sort of preparation to bring his karbanos. Whereas a nazir, it's the opposite. First, you bring the karbanos to atone, then you're cleared, shave your head, and then restart your naziris. It doesn't count. It doesn't count for his tzaras and for his naziris. For the fact that he's a mitzvah and he's a nazir. Okay. So Gemara says a different question. Okay, so Gemara says if he's a nazir tamei and he's a mitzvah, why can't the second shaving, the second time he shaves his head, count for mitzvah and also count for tumah, because he has to shave his head anyway? 1 second, hold on. So he says to him, "Ilu zelef nebias mayim v'zelef nebias mayim yafat amemam." In other words, 1 second. It appears that over here in this scenario where the guy was a nazir tamei, it seems like he shaves his head before he brings his karbanos, or at least he could. It's only a regular nazir that shaves after the karbanos. So they said, okay, if that's the case, this should be analogous to mitzvah, and you should be able to count 1 shaving for nazir tamei and a mitzvah after at day number 8. So Amar Lahem, he said it's also different. Ilu zelef nebias mayim v'zelef nebias mayim yafat amayim. If they both shave their heads before going to the mikvah, then it would make sense. The same type of shaving. However, a person who's tamei shaves his head before he goes to the mikvah. Mitzara, 1 second. I'm sorry. First, a nazir tamei shaves after he goes to the mikvah. Mitzara lefnebias mayim. It's a preparation to go to the mikvah. Okay. Amar lo yafar amrit shalei talei. So they said to him, okay, you're right. It's true that the 8th day of mitzara and nazir tamei don't work. Limei Sifra Uleneziruse. It shouldn't work counting the 8th day and the Nazir Tom and Nazir Tomei should not work. However, the first shaving of a mitzvah, which is to grow his hair, and the shaving of a Nazir Tomei should also work, because the Nazir Tomei is also shaving his head to start growing it again. Okay. So they're really very similar. The Zelagadol, they're both shaving their heads to grow it again. The Nazir for 30 days, the mitzvah for 8 days. So Amar Lahen, his response to them is, basically in summary, the response is, look, every other shaving is different. So therefore these are going to be different as well.
See, the barbers usually step in here.
Amar
Plenty of shaving.
Lahen, he responded, Im Nazir Tohar v'hu mitzvah, in a scenario of a Nazir Tohar and he's a mitzvah. Zelagadol v'zelahaver. Then we say that a mitzvah is to grow his hair for 8 days, and the Nazir is to end his Nazir, is to take off his hair. V'im Nazir Tohar v'hu mitzvah. In a scenario of Nazir Tomei and mitzvah, we say zelaf maybe ismayim, zelachar b'ismayim. We say one's before the mikvah, one's after the mikvah. The mitzvah who's becoming tahar is before the mikvah, and a Nazir Tomei is after the mikvah. And therefore they are incompatible. Tani Reb Chia, zelaf nei b'ismayim, zelachar b'ismayim, zelaf nei zikasam, zelachar zikasam. Reb Chia added in the last scenario, which is in the scenario comparing the end of a Naziris to the end of a mitzvah, meaning after the 8-day period, is also not similar, because the mitzvah shaves his head before bringing the karbonos. In other words, after the 8-day period, and the Nazir shaves his head after he brings his karbonos at the conclusion of his Nazir. So therefore, because none of the other 3 shavings are compatible, we say that the shaving here at the conclusion of mitzvah, meaning the beginning of the 8 days, the first shaving of mitzvah, and the shaving of a Nazir Tomei, even though they're both shaving for the same reason, to be able to grow their hair again, the mitzvah for 8 days, the Nazir for 30 days. Because every other shaving is different, this one we say is also incomparable. Okay, stop here. Yes.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
So, Yossi's also been